So today I'm going to be using my 23 quart. And the first thing I want to do is I want to get this with the water and a little splash of vinegar just set up so that it's ready to go. So one thing I do right at the beginning is I take the seal, I give it a little bit of oil on some kitchen roll, and I give it a good layer all over just to keep it nice and supple so that it seals well. It also gives me the opportunity to check and make sure that it's clean and that there's no debris or grit anywhere that will prevent a good seal. So as you can see with this canner, we've got the rack that sits in the bottom. Now this has got a little bit of black patina covering it. This was because it was second-hand when I got it, but also if you run the canner without vinegar in this area, it does get covered in this. I have prevented this from happening any worse or up the sides by using, again, a little bit of white vinegar in the bottom. So I'm going to fill it now with 3 quarts or litres. Because we're here in the UK, we use litres. So that's 3 litres of water. Little splash of vinegar. A little splash of vinegar. The vinegar I buy in 5-litre tubs, so I just put a cap full of that in, and that should be enough now. So I'm going to put this on the heat now. Here I have, these are haricot beans. They've been soaking for a day. Again, you can see that the water's gone a little bit murky. What we're going to do now is I'm going to drain these off and replace the water with, I've got some fresh boiling water on the stove ready to go. The reason we drain the water out is to remove the phytotoxins from the beans, which, if anybody knows the tune, will know why we remove that water. So, what we're doing now, these are the ingredients. So we add a tiny little bit of oil to the pan, and we saute the onion. We saute the onion. Now here we have 1 chopped onion. We've got 4 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. We've got 1 teaspoon of sriracha, the one with the rooster. We've got 1/4 cup of sugar, 1 tablespoon of dried thyme, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, bicarbonate of soda. Also calls for 2 cloves of garlic. What I've used today is I've used a little block of garlic that I froze earlier. And 5 cups of tomato juice. And in English money, that is just over 1 litre. Ta-da! Magically sauteed onions. So now we will add the garlic and the thyme for 1 more minute. While that is sauteing for an extra minute, we're going to cover these beans in fresh boiling water and put them back on to boil for half an hour. Now that's done, we're going to add our tomato juice. sugar, sriracha, Worcestershire sauce, bicarb. Now we're going to simmer that sauce for half an hour. So I have sauteed my onions, garlic, added in the rest of the ingredients, and I am now simmering that sauce for 30 minutes. I have topped up the beans with some fresh boiling water, and I'm again boiling those for another 30 minutes before the jars are ready. While those are boiling, I'm going to get my equipment ready. So I have my jiggler on hand. I have one ring because I need to process at 10 pounds of pressure today. These are my Weck jar tongs, which are my favourite ones. I much prefer them to the Kilner, which is the other set that I've got. I just feel a bit more sturdy. I have my debubbler. Now you don't necessarily need one of these, but it can be very helpful, especially if you're feeling somewhat rushed. You can use the end to debubble your jars, and it's got a handy measuring gauge for the headspace. You've got 1 inch, 3/4, 1/2, and 1/4. You just rest it on the lip of your jar, as so. Now I've got my jars freshly washed and sitting in some hot water in the sink so that when I go to fill them I don't shock the jars with the heat and lead to a crack in them. I have got a packet of seals ready to put on my jars, and I have got my little jar of clips right here ready to use. So now that the beans have had their half-hour boil, I've got all my equipment ready. I'm just going to put this off to one side now. What we're going to do is I'm going to get my jars. So as you can see, the jars are slightly wet. They're also warm. They've been sitting in hot water in the sink waiting to be filled. The reason we want them warm is that if we leave them cold and then we pour hot contents into them, we run the risk of cracking the jar and giving it shock. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to fill the jars first off with beans. I want it about there. No, a bit more. And about 2 scoops is usually adequate in this particular ladle. The beans will expand a little more in the jar as they're being processed. So the minimum number of jars you can run in the canner at any one time is 4 pints or 2 quarts, obviously 2 litres in the UK.
We've got our beans ready there, I'm going to put them to one side. I'm going to bring back my sauce. Now what I've done is I've added the bean juice that remained when I'd taken the beans out to the sauce. Thin it out a bit and give it a bit of a better texture. I'm now just going to blend this.
Smoothed down. I'm going to fill the jars to within 1 inch of the top. Now with the Weck jars you can be a little bit less discerning with the inch. There's a wider aperture. So the Weck jars have a slightly wider aperture, so you don't have to worry too much. Weck themselves actually say that you can fill them as full as you can get them, but I do recommend leaving a bit of headspace just to allow the beans to expand. Now I know that what I'm going to do now that those are filled is I'm just going to run that around the edges to release any air pockets that may have collected between the beans, because we don't want them getting caught. If you catch an air bubble, if an air bubble gets caught in processing, then it can be a little window to breed bacteria. So you want to make sure that all of those are out. You can just see them coming to the surface. As you see, the level of the sauce drops slightly as well at that point. So now what we do, I wipe the rims. That's a little, hang on, let me remove that. So now what we do is we wipe the rims with a clean cloth, or I'm using some kitchen roll, a little bit of white vinegar just to remove any residue from the beans or the sauce there. Spilled that one a little bit, look. And now they're ready for their lids. So we got our clean ring, brush it around the lid, place it firmly on, and we attach the hooks from the inside out, making sure to get them all the way on, like that. Once we've done all 4, we will put them into the heated canner, which I have already started running to make sure it's ready to go, because we don't want to lose any heat. Last one. And now we will get them in the canner. So normally I would do this on the heat, but as I can't get the camera over there at the moment, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to put the jars in as so. I'm going to make sure to place them evenly around the canner. And what you want to make sure of with these jars is when you're putting them in, you want to make sure that the little tabs aren't near the sides of another jar. I've had them catch before and ended up with 2 jars held together where the tab has caught in the canner. So I'm going to put this back on the heat now. Now my 10-minute timer has just gone off, and as you can see my little pressure lock has just popped up. I'm now going to put the weight on, wait for it to come up to pressure. When it comes up to pressure, I will then turn the heat down to keep it at a continuous rock. I shall see you in about 10 minutes. So as you can see here, it is just starting to come up to pressure. I'm trying to hold the camera as still as I can, sorry. So it's just starting to rock, the gauge has just hit 10 pounds. You can see the can has just got up to pressure, it's jiggling away nicely. I've made sure to turn the burner down as low as I can whilst maintaining the rocking. So I've just turned the heat off in the canner. As you can see, the weight has already settled down. I thought I was filming it, but had apparently pressed the wrong button. So what we'll see now, the weight has already stopped jiggling. I've just turned the heat off. You will now see the pressure on the gauge start to drop as there's no longer any heat to build further pressure. As you can see, the pressure has come right down now. We'll just give it a little minute with the weight off to vent the excess. You can see the pressure lock dropped there, which means there's no pressure remaining in the canner. So we're going to let it sit with the weight off for 10 minutes and then we'll come back and take the lid off. So we've now given that 10 minutes and it's time to take the lid off the canner. So what we do is we twist it to release and then we tilt it up like that so that the steam releases away from us. I'm now going to leave it for an additional 10 minutes. I have found that this makes a significant difference to any siphoning issues. I have practically no siphoning the way I do it. I have found I used to have a lot of issues, but having adjusted my technique with A, using 2 clips on the jars instead of 3, and B, adding this extra 10-minute weight on after opening the lid has made a massive difference. So what we are going to do now is we're going to remove the jars from the canner. So that you can see this process, I'll bring the canner over to here. So what I've done is I've done a second layer in this canner load. So I'll just pull out my second rack, like that. So I stagger stacked the jars on top of the rack to fit a second layer. And there we lift them out. Quite happy looking jars. They are all bubbling away nicely inside. It's tricky to see with the beans because the tomato in the sauce tends to stick to the lids a bit. Now, I'm making sure as I take the jars out of the canner that I am resting them onto a towel, not onto the counter. I've got the windows closed. What I don't want to end up is shocking a jar and having it smash and then I'm not able to use it again. I'm just going to let those now sit there. I'm not going to touch them for 12 to 24 hours. I tend to leave them for 24 myself, but obviously if you're constrained for time, the first 12 hours are the most crucial. So you can see the jar bubbling away here, which is an indication that it's forming a good seal. What you can also see is the beans have expanded a bit more and they are now filling the jar nicely without too much of a gap for headspace. So now I've let the jars sit for 24 hours and we're going to have a quick look at them. So we take the clips off, working carefully from the bottom. I always put my thumb on the top to make sure they don't spring off across the room. And what we then do, we hold it by the lid, give it a little shake, and as you can see, it's not budging. So it's got a good seal. The tab's pointing down, which is a good sign. Whee! Like that. So, and again, it's not shifting. So when I'm doing that, I'm just holding it by the lid itself. I'm not touching the jar at all. Good. All good. As you can see, this one had a little bit of liquid on the top when I took it out of the canner. That's fine. I will leave it there and I'll wipe it off afterwards. I won't tip it off while I'm doing it, just in case I move some of the contents and it ends up under the seal before they're finished. So you can see a tiny bit of lime scale as well on some of them. So give them a good wipe. So what I'll do now is I will get some soapy water and I'll give the jars all a good wipe down all over to make sure that any residue is off. Make sure to get under that tab as well, which can be a little spot for it to build if they've siphoned a tiny bit like this one.